Assalamu alaikum, this is Syed Shabahat. Welcome to PTV World's special transmission. We are going to discuss today OIC's extraordinary meeting of Foreign Council, Council of Foreign Ministers taking place in Islamabad. The major reason why Pakistan is hosting this conference is to attract international attention towards the issue of Afghanistan. Afghanistan not only is facing serious diplomatic crisis today, but is also facing catastrophic economic crisis that is now melting down into a humanitarian catastrophe. This humanitarian crisis is prolonging further when no major power has made so far any major financial commitment when it comes to Afghanistan. We are also aware of the fact that COVID virus as well as winters are in combination again here. The spread of COVID virus is spreading more, and Afghanistan doesn't have enough infrastructure of health. All of this together is causing a lot of concerns for all the friends of Afghanistan, particularly in the neighboring country. And when it comes to Pakistan, Pakistan not only this time but also in the past has always taken a major lead to convince the world about the issues of Afghanistan. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I introduce my guest lineup.
A deepening humanitarian quandary of Afghanistan reflects the flawed approach of international community towards Afghanistan with tragic consequences. The crumbling healthcare system, economic meltdown of aid-dependent economy, pandemic, food insecurity exacerbated by drought and harsh winter all combined to create a perfect storm for killing more Afghans than bullets. Raising further alarm, the UN envoy for Afghanistan, Deborah Lawrence, said an estimated 60% of Afghanistan's 38 million people are facing crisis level of hunger in a food emergency that will likely worsen over the winter.
Now is not the time to turn away from the Afghan people. We must find ways to prevent an imminent humanitarian catastrophe and the terrible loss of life that could happen over the winter.
According to UNICEF, around 3.2 million Afghan children are acutely malnourished and 1.1 million children are at risk of dying because of severe acute malnutrition unless we intervene with treatment. Explaining the country's worst humanitarian disaster, Abdullah al-Dardari, the resident representative of the UNDP in Afghanistan, some 23 million people are in desperate need of food. The $20 billion economy could shrink by $4 billion or more, and 97% of the 38 million population are at risk of sinking into poverty. As an emphatic gesture, Pakistan has announced $28 million medical, food and other humanitarian assistance for Afghanistan, while also authorizing the transport of food aid from India through Pakistan to Afghanistan. The ensuing catastrophe is preventable as releasing the frozen funds, the Afghan Central Bank's $9 billion reserves, most of which are held in the US, would alleviate the current humanitarian crisis. UNICEF official Samantha Mort noted that this is not time for political brinkmanship. People in Afghanistan are dying and they need our support. Humanitarian aid is the last expression of human solidarity.
This was the report prepared by our team, and let me introduce my guests in the program. My first guest in today's program is Ambassador Asif Durrani. He's retired ambassador of Pakistan, has represented Pakistan as an ambassador in Iran and UAE, has remained deputy head of mission in Afghanistan, London, India, and also represented Pakistan's mission in United Nations as deputy head of mission. Ambassador Sahab, I welcome you to my program. With him, I have Usama Nizamani. He is researcher at IPRI and has very keen interest in the issues of South Asia, with a particular focus on Afghanistan. And with him, I have Arhama Siddiqui. She's a research fellow at ISSI and has very keen interest in the issues of Afghanistan. I welcome all of you, my guests, in the program.
Thank you.
Ambassador Saab, to begin with, Pakistan is taken the center stage and is trying to attract the attention of the entire world toward the looming humanitarian, diplomatic, as well as economic crisis that are that today Afghanistan is facing. What are your comments on it?
Well, I think let's be realistic. Center stage has come because the meeting of the OIC foreign ministers is taking place in Islamabad, to which there was a consensus among the OIC member states and the chairman. And chairman at the moment is Saudi Arabia. So it is a collaborative effort. Pakistan happens to be in the neighborhood of Afghanistan, and anything happening in Afghanistan directly impacts Pakistan and other neighbors as well. But Pakistan has been impacted more severely, especially whenever there was a civil war, whether it was Soviet invasion of Afghanistan or whether it was after Mujahideen's triumph, the civil war started, and then Taliban taking over, and then 9/11. So these all events in fact impacted Pakistan, and not only at the social level but also economic levels. And then war on terror in fact cost us dearly. We lost 80,000 Pakistanis, including over 8,000 our security forces people. We lost almost $150 billion in the opportunity cost. While we were declared as a non-NATO ally, at the same time, United States and other Western countries, they imposed travel restrictions. They issued travel advisories on Pakistan. The result was that doing business became expensive with Pakistan. Insurance costs went up, and which is why that our exports have not risen since 9/11 onwards. They are almost stagnant. So these are the impacts. So right now the OIC's extraordinary session on Afghanistan is taking place almost after 41 years. And this is only about Afghanistan. Otherwise, OIC's ministerial meetings have taken place here 3-4 times, as well as summit. So what I wanted to say is that being a direct neighbor, Pakistan has to assume the role in a way to facilitate the meeting point. And since it happens to be here, like in 1980 when the OIC's emergency meeting took place in the aftermath of Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, so again Pakistan was next door. The venue also matters, and therefore it is also. And then there is a likelihood that the delegation of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, they will also be here, although they may not be participating in the plenary because they are still not recognized. Still, they will be here on the sidelines. They will be meeting the people, and then on the sidelines, there is also going to be a meeting of the Troika Plus, Pakistan, US, China, and Russia. So in a way, there's a movement. There's a movement to break the ice. There's a movement to address the immediate priority issues, which is, as you mentioned in your introduction, is the catastrophe which is visiting Afghanistan. It is not that we are anticipating, it is already visiting Afghanistan. As you rightly pointed out, almost 26 million people are in fact in a food crisis situation. Then if the situation goes on, already 3 million children are malnourished, and they are likely to die in another 2 to 3 months. And then this is not time to have brinkmanship, as one of the UN officials just pointed out in your documentary. This is not the time, because this is the humanitarian catastrophe which will impact not only Afghanistan, its neighborhood, but beyond.
It's going to hit us beyond. Usama, do you agree that, as Ambassador Saab said, Pakistan is taking the lead role because OIC had taken the initiative, but we have seen that even in the recent past, ever since Taliban took control, Pakistan has made more efforts than any other country to help Afghanistan out. Perhaps we were anticipating it better than anything else. We took a lead in Troika. We took a lead in convening the meeting of the neighboring countries, and our efforts are still going on.
I think I completely agree with Ambassador Durrani as far as this point is concerned. As in terms of the anticipation of the events, the way they shaped right after the withdrawal of U.S. and Western troops from Afghanistan, I think nobody could have imagined the amount of human catastrophe that we are anticipating right now, in the coming few months. But as Ambassador Saab pointed out, that, you know, there are some indicators that are quite, quite in the open, like over 22 million people are being faced with the acute threat of food insecurity. Then we have over 3 million children that can suffer from malnutrition. I think now the point that comes forward, apart from the fact that, you know, Pakistan has been at the forefront of reaching out to different countries, different regions, in terms of, you know, highlighting the gravity of the issue. But I think moving forward, I think what is really required right now is that how could Pakistan, in collaboration with other countries, can take up some kind of an assessment of the situation on the ground. Because at the end of the day, you know, we're going to be having this task for the mobilization of monetary resources for addressing the human crisis, the humanitarian crisis that, you know, we have at our hands in Afghanistan. So I think we need a more strategic focus towards in terms of what are some of the social sectors.
Usama, we will talk about the strategic focus
right.
in a while, but I have Dr. Abid Sulehri. He is a leading economist, a very well-known economist of Pakistan, as well as an executive director with SDPI. Dr. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Dr. We are going to discuss today Pakistan's role in drawing international attention when it comes to the economic catastrophe of Afghanistan. Can you help us to understand this economic crisis that Afghanistan is facing at the moment? How bad is it?
Well, just to put the things in perspective, first of all, we need to see that before Taliban took over, what was the economic situation in Afghanistan, and one knows that it was completely being sponsored and supported by international aid. So almost 50% of GDP of Afghanistan, that was coming through foreign aid. Almost 75% of public sector expenses, those were being met by foreign aid. And similarly, all of the salaries of the civil servants, those were being paid by foreign aid. Now, on 15th of August, the world saw two things collapsing. One was Afghanistan's military forces collapsing, and the second was its economy collapsing. So one can say that unfortunately the allied forces and allied countries, they neither built Afghanistan's defense nor they built Afghanistan's economy. And after putting de facto sanctions on Taliban government in the name of fundamental human rights, which no one can disagree with, but the sanctions are just like throwing the baby out with the bath water, because the intended beneficiary of their demands, the Afghan people, they are being punished for a government that is not going to the demands of Western countries. And this is a sheer injustice. Now, it is being said that Afghanistan may be the only country in this last 100 years which would observe universal rate of poverty. 97% of people of Afghanistan by February, if the international assistance is not provided, they would be below the poverty line, and that would be for the first time in our modern history. So when the international community says leaving no one behind for sustainable development goals, we are leaving 40 million people of a country. We are leaving the whole country behind. And that's where Pakistan is raising voice for, because we are mindful of the situation in Afghanistan. We are mindful of our own situation. Pakistan can't afford to host more refugees. And if assistance is not mobilized quickly in Afghanistan, we are expecting 500,000 to 1 million refugees in Pakistan, people who are largely unvaccinated for polio as well as for COVID. And we never know that out of those, how many may belong to TTP, one of the opponent forces of Pakistan. So Pakistan is raising voice for Afghan people, and Pakistan has to do this for its own security and own
Dr. Abid, you are pointing out a very pertinent issue, but I have a very important question for you. Afghanistan's central bank is disassociated, delinked from the rest of the banking system of the world. And there is no foreign exchange going into the country. There is no trade formally taking place. They do not have access to their existing foreign exchange reserves. How long the currency is likely to stay viable? Because we are reading in the news that Afghan currency is facing serious crisis. And if this keeps going on, will this state be economically viable? Will this currency stay afloat and will keep flowing within the system?
Well, it would be quite astonishing for the viewers. Afghanistan doesn't print its own currency. So the Afghani currency was being printed by Poland and it was being printed by France. After the Taliban takeover, they stopped printing the currency, and that's why there is a sheer shortage of Afghan currency. So there is a shortage of local currency as well. There is a shortage of dollars. You rightly pointed out towards the banking system. So due to American sanctions, no international bank is actually able to transfer money to Afghanistan, because the intermediate banks, they would have to give an assurance, the trail to the last dollar, that if I'm sending $100,000, even if $1 goes to Taliban, I will be under sanction. And this is something which is practically hunting not only the Afghan people, but also the countries who are willing to support Afghan people in the time of crisis. And I hope that the OIC conference, they would make an appeal that humanitarian assistance and international assistance, that should be facilitated through easing of some banking channels. People, they can actually receive the humanitarian assistance. And second thing is almost $9 billion worth of assets which are frozen in the United States. So Afghan central bank's $9 billion worth of investment, that is not frozen. So if that money is released and if international assistance is provided, Afghanistan can be at least back to survival. But right now we are taking everything away from Afghan people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abid Salehri, for being guest in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Abid Salehri pointed out, the economic crisis is quite difficult in its very nature. He said that even the currency of Afghanistan was not printed inside Afghanistan, and this has further exacerbated the crisis of the currency. I'm coming back to you, Arhama. How concerned you are as an expert of this region with the humanitarian and economic crisis coupling together, haunting the people of Afghanistan? What are your biggest concerns in this situation?
Because I believe that people can manage to survive even in a war-torn country, but people cannot survive when there is hunger. And so that will lead to a mass refugee outburst, especially in Pakistan. If I were to rank the countries, Pakistan, then Iran, and then the Central Asian states. There will be a huge refugee influx in these countries. Also because apparently there have been reports that ISKP has been giving cash incentives to a lot of poor Afghan families to recruit them, and that has that will obviously create the situation in Afghanistan is creating a vacuum for terrorist elements to become more active, and obviously that will have a spillover effect in the region, and then obviously the whole world as a domino effect.
Ambassador Saab, I mean, in this modern world, in this world where trillions of dollars have been spent on Afghanistan, it's not understandable if all of this is happening just because Taliban are not agreeing to certain points. There is a very smart international financial system and a diplomatic system that understands the dynamics of such catastrophes. Is it happening by design that, as she rightly pointed out, that a terrorist outfit has cash in hand in Afghanistan at the moment and the state is standing cashless?
Well, it's a very important point that how come ISIS in Afghanistan got so much resources. It's coming from somewhere. And America cannot absolve of the responsibility that ISIS took roots in Afghanistan under their watch, because it's hardly a 10-year-old phenomenon. Elsewhere, it started from Syria and Iraq. but it has come here. And then I think some of the neighbors of Afghanistan have expressed grave doubts about the connivance of some of the Western countries, including India also, that they have been propping up Daesh in order to keep them under pressure, the Taliban, and of course Ashraf Ghani government, or before that Karzai's governments, they were parachuted in Afghanistan. Therefore, they could not, in fact, sustain the democratic order, the so-called democratic order which was established there. And the United States miserably failed in nation building, which they tried to took upon themselves, and it failed. In this whole scenario, it's the real politic. After the withdrawal of the American troops, for the United States now, I think it is their turn to, in fact, tell the dispensation in Afghanistan that we are in charge, which you have seen that how they have controlled the banking system throughout the world, that they have imposed restrictions on Afghan banks, and Afghan banks cannot deal with the world. So the result would be that even if you give humanitarian assistance to the Afghans, Afghanistan is not going to return as a normal country unless the banking system operates as per the international standards. The Afghans, they cannot import or export legally, or you cannot open the letter of credits. So much so that the Afghan diaspora in the Gulf states or in Europe or in the United States, they wanted to send money to their near ones, dear ones, and they cannot do that. Now it is being said that the United States will be lifting those restrictions at least for the diaspora. But at the same time, UN agencies and INGOs, they are also facing problem. For instance, some of the INGOs and some countries in Europe, they wanted to pay the salaries of the teachers. Now, when we say that women's rights are to be protected, that and especially they are to be given education, it's now almost 3-4 months that government officials have not received salaries. There are approximately 500,000 government officials, 2/3 of which are the teachers, and a substantive number, almost 50%, are the women. So if this is a number, and then the government cannot pay the salaries, is also a big commentary that how Ashraf Ghani government, when he left the country, there was nothing was left in the country when he left the country. So and then what the Americans were doing, because they had stopped giving financial aid to the Afghan armed forces since April. The rations and salaries were not paid since July. So this is a sad commentary, and there should be some probing to that. So here when we say that this catastrophe and how they are going to cope, and why the Americans, or why there is no moral obligation or something, there is no moral obligation. Under the American watch, 500,000 people were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq. There is no moral obligation. It's the real world. It's the real world, and the United States is responsible. United States, in fact, banned those lawyers who wanted to take the matter to the International Court of International Criminal Court. And mind you, the United States in 2001 unsigned the International Criminal Court Charter. Earlier they signed it, so they withdrew from that. So this is the way right now the world order is being framed. Earlier it was thought that it is United States will be the only superpower. Now they want to contrive another rival in the shape of China and Russia. And then during Trump's time they went unilateral. While Mr. Biden claims to be multilateralist, his actions do not support his claims.
Not speaking
so
as
this is something this need to be told to the world and to the United States also, that you just cannot dictate the terms the way you have been doing so, because ultimately it would in fact impact you and the West, that they want to dictate their terms by hook and crook, and Afghanistan is a glaring example. When you spoke about trillions of dollars spent there, total spending on Afghanistan has been hardly $142 billion in the past 20 years, which is not much. It comes to only 10 to 12 billion, out of which $87 billion were spent on the Afghan armed forces. The remaining was supplemented into
spent on the military-industrial complex.
Yes.
That has spent ruthlessly,
so
and there has been a lot of criticism around this subject. Usama, in absence of a state that has its grip on the financial system, in absence of financial institutions, in absence of a governing mechanism that has its fingers down the road and has a reach to the grassroots of the society, what can we expect from this current conference? What kind of commitments, as an expert, you would expect to come out of this wonderful gathering of representatives of 57 nations?
Well, I think at the end of the day, what we're really expecting is more substance instead of the optics, because I think this is where we should rather be focusing. I think these 3 days are very, very important, not just for the future of Afghanistan, but for the future of the region itself. So I think that is where we need to sort of come down and have a more keen focus in terms of what are some of the areas, like for example, social sectors like health and education, and other important areas like, for example, supplies of important food items that are needed in order to ensure that the public in Afghanistan and the larger vulnerable segments of the society are not at the threat of being exposed to a lot of these risks at the end of the day. So I think what is needed is that what I was mentioning earlier on is to have a very candid assessment. And I think although that it's a very hard-faced government that we have in Afghanistan right now, it has a lot of challenges. The problem here is not either does anyone like the kind of government that's in place. The question is, at the end of the day, what are the kind of challenges that the Afghan public are going to face? And I think this is where it should be pointed out, regardless of what kind of factors we are engaging. We need to have an honest assessment of what is needed. We should try and get some kind of a credible commitment from some of the most important actors from Islamic countries that are part of OIC. And also, I think a positive element that's one part of this engagement is that we also have United States participating in this extraordinary meeting that is taking place. So I think on one hand we can undertake the assessments and the commitments. On the third element, we need to prepare a special consortium of countries under the auspices of the OIC, which should sort of take this collective responsibility of engaging with the rest of the world, with some of the most important multilateral forums, in terms of ensuring how we could have access to humanitarian supplies, how we could go ahead and come up with some kind of a roadmap which would, say have a condition-based recognition in future for the government. And I say condition-based. That can be a graduated approach also. But I think delinking the recognition question for a moment, setting it aside, I think what's really important is at the end of the day, if we want to have some kind of a mechanism in place, Afghanistan does need a lot of monetary resources in order to ensure that, at the end of the day, the people that are associated with ensuring that we can have a stable state in place, at least a stable government in place, and a public that can have some kind of resources from a functioning society, those elements need to be brought in place, irrespective of who really is in the government right now. And I think the rest of the world, especially the Western world, has a lot of leverage right now at this moment. They can exercise it. With that said, I think one element that we sort of need to focus on over here is that it's a threatening environment that not only affects the region, but also far-flung areas as the Europe also, because the human catastrophe that we saw in conflicts like Syria, we also saw
it's going to affect everywhere.
Exactly, and what happened in Iraq also. So I think we need to sort of bring in that focus over here. That tragic sensibility is also warranted over here in case of Afghanistan also.
Arhama, what Usama said, you just heard, and there is a very pertinent point that he has made. And if I rephrase him, this is blurring the lines between the people of Afghanistan and between the state of Afghanistan by the diplomatic discourse that is coming out of the United States. Also, we are seeing a criminal silence on the entire Western media. Now, this Western media that on its optics or on its cosmetics is free and independent, is not covering this issue at all. There is a dead silence. We don't see this being covered anywhere, not taking a center stage, as I said in first of my part of my conversation. What do you think of it?
Honestly, building on what Usama said, I would first say that under the OIC, we have a very good opportunity of having, under the wider framework of the OIC, to have a platform or a consolidated group on Afghanistan specifically, not only in terms of providing immediate humanitarian aid, which is the requirement right now, but also to frame a long-term roadmap in terms of banking sector, economy, how to stabilize the Afghan government. Yes, we have seen in the past also in other cases as well that the West is criminally, hypocritically, I would say, silent on issues. For example, in Afghanistan also you don't see much happening over there. But again, it also boils down, I would say, to the Muslim Ummah. Is the OIC, this meeting will decide, is the OIC a meeting of the Muslim states, or is it a chance for the Muslim Ummah to come together? Because they are so fractured amongst themselves that unless they present a united front, then the West will catch on then immediately that this is a serious situation and must be taken notice of. But the onus first of all lies on the Muslim countries and on the US as well, because in the manner in which they withdrew from Afghanistan, you cannot separate the US from Afghanistan at this point. So the onus is on the US for its irresponsible withdrawal, and the onus is on the Muslim countries to come together as an ummah for once.
Ambassador Sahab, countries like Turkey, countries like Iran, countries like Saudi Arabia also have an active interest when it comes to Afghanistan. Turkey had offered support in terms of military assistance. They wanted to take over the security of Kabul airport, which was quite criticized in the West as well. Iran is in the immediate neighborhood and face similar challenges like Pakistan. And then we have Saudi Arabia, as you very rightly said, was taken the center stage, has a bigger role when it comes to IC. How hopeful you are when it comes to see the commitments coming from rich, oil-rich countries, cash-rich countries that have asked Pakistan to take the lead in this initiative?
Well, I think there are likely some commitments from the member states. I cannot predict about the volume of commitments, that how much they can, but they can do a lot. But more than that, Afghanistan, if Afghanistan has to stand on its feet, then I think Afghanistan should be encouraged and ushered to normalcy. And that normalcy can only come if their financial institutions are working on a normal pace. So those restrictions have to be removed, otherwise they will be facing dire consequences. And for that, I think the OIC should also call upon the United States and other NATO countries which have exercised restrictions on Afghanistan's government, that they should at least contribute to the normalcy of the country. As far as the recognition of Taliban is concerned, that would be an ongoing process. Certainly there are certain conditions which are to be met by the Taliban and also by the United States. For instance, Under the agreement, the United States had to request to the UN Security Council to delist the Taliban by 27th May 2020. It did not happen. And the result is that the Taliban, major Taliban leaders are still on the list. And all the time they have to travel, they have to seek exemptions to travel abroad. So this is something which would not be helpful. And the 1267 committee, which was then transformed to Taliban committee, known as 1988 committee of the UN Security Council, will have to, in fact, will be meeting in a few days from now.
Sure.
To decide about the fate of continuing with the list and its mandate. So let's see how it transpires. And then the Troika's meeting, Troika Plus meeting, would also be very important and will be contributing to the OIC's ministerial meeting. Reason is, as I said earlier, that the United States, since it's a hyperpower, it has all the necessary wherewithal to and leverage it can use against the countries. Take the example of Iran. Its businesses have been adversely impacted. Hadn't it been China and Russia, I think the situation would have been very dire, very serious. But and so Taliban, their government now, the irony is that Taliban may have won the battle, but they are now dependent on the world community to run the country. So this is an irony. This could be a tragedy, and it can turn into a tragedy if the world does not engage with the
timely and
the existing dispensation in the country.
Your last quick comment, Usama, as we close the program.
I think just to give 2 points, we should remember what happened in Iraq after, under President Barack Obama's watch, when the U.S. forces had withdrawn from the country. I think that lesson should remind us, that some ingredients were, left unattended, which led to the development of phenomena like ISIS in order to create that kind of instability that we saw in Middle East. I think, again, in Afghanistan, the prime focus should be the people of Afghanistan, the society and the economy of Afghanistan, instead of the political element being given the primacy. So I think we should focus on the people. That includes the women, that includes their children, that also includes the most vulnerable segments of the society that needs the humanitarian aid, in the immediate and the short term. So I think we should focus on those 3 elements.
Thank you very much, Usama. Thank you very much, Ambassador Asif Durrani. Thank you very much, Arhama, for being my guest in today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, Afghanistan's situation is requiring for extraordinary measures by the entire global community. Pakistan has always taken a good part, and Pakistan is doing whatever best is possible within its meager economic and financial resources. That said, today is the day when we are going to see how the other member states of OIC are going to respond to this emerging catastrophe, or as Ambassador Durrani said, the existing catastrophe of Afghanistan. This transmission will continue, but we end the program right here. Thank you very much for watching.